The first time she called me Ruth, not Mom, was in the rose garden I planted myself 30 years ago. It was her bridal shower, and I was trimming back the faded blooms still in my apron, still trying to make everything perfect. A younger woman, her new sister-in-law, I think asked her, "Is that your mom?" And my daughter Charlotte laughed lightly and said, "Oh, she's Ruth. She just helps. She just helps. Not my mother. Not she raised me alone. Just Ruth, the woman in the dirt." I pretended I hadn't heard. I always did. But it sat there like a thorn just beneath the skin, pulsing quietly. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat in the kitchen with the light off, listening to the old fridge hum, and I thought about all the times I had held her while she sobbed, all the times I worked 2 jobs to keep our little house warm in the winter, how I skipped meals so she wouldn't feel poor, and now I was just Ruth. But then came the wedding, and surely I thought a new beginning, a chance to be included, to be family again. She looked radiant in ivory lace, her curls pinned back with my mother's brooch, the one I loaned her quietly that morning. She didn't thank me, but I held my tongue. At the reception I was seated at the back, near the restrooms. No name card, no toast, no dance, and yet I smiled, because that's what you do when you're the mother no one wants to claim anymore. It wasn't until the next morning in a quiet booth at a diner near the hotel that she told me plainly, "You know, Mom, actually, Ruth, I think it's best if we keep some distance now. Matthew and I, we want our own family." I blinked. "I am your family." She stirred her coffee like I hadn't spoken. "No offense, but this new chapter, it's about healthy boundaries. No more surprise drop-bys, no uninvited advice, and definitely no financial entanglements." I didn't say a word, just nodded slowly, bit the inside of my cheek to keep from trembling, paid for her coffee, walked out into the morning sun that felt much too cold, but something inside me, something old and sharp, began to stir. I raised her. I protected her. I sacrificed for her. And now I was cut off. If I was no longer her mother, then maybe she was no longer my heir. The lawyer blinked at me across the desk. "You're removing your only child from the will?" "Yes," I said, "and I want that change notarized. Today." It had been 2 weeks since Charlotte's wedding, 2 weeks since she called me Ruth to my face, since she used the phrase financial entanglements like I was a broken slot machine. The funny thing is, I hadn't even told her about the money, about what happened 2 summers ago when my brother passed and left me everything: his ranch, his shares in the timber company, even his old Mustang in the garage, over $3 million in clean, quiet assets. She didn't know, because she'd never asked. After her wedding, I took my time. I baked bread-folded sheets, sat on the porch with my tea, and thought hard. I didn't want revenge. I wanted clarity. I remembered the sound of her teenage voice shouting, "You never have enough. I want a mom who doesn't wear thrift store shoes." I remembered paying off her student loans anyway. I remembered her text 2 years ago that read, "Please don't post pictures of me anymore. My followers think you're my aunt." And then I remembered who I used to be before I begged to belong. That day at the lawyer's office, I signed the new will with a steady hand. No heirs listed, just a trust, one meant for a woman's shelter. I had once stayed in when Charlotte's father broke my arm. They needed it more than my daughter needed a second home in Vermont. As I rose to leave, my lawyer said, "You understand if she contests it." "She won't," I said. "She's already told me I'm not family." Then I walked out the will, folded in my handbag, crisp and final. 3 days later, the call came. "Charlotte," her voice tight. "Hi, Ruth. Listen. Weird question. Did you change something in your estate plan?" I paused. "I thought we agreed not to involve each other in financial entanglements." "Don't be like that," she snapped. "Matthew and I just met with a planner and they ran some projections. You were supposed to be a part of the retirement safety net." I laughed. Out loud. "You really think you can declare me obsolete and then inherit me later? Silence. Are you seriously holding money over my head?" she hissed. "No," I said. "I'm letting go of it. You said I wasn't family. I'm simply agreeing." She hung up. 5 minutes later, she texted, "Fine. But don't expect us to come around when you get sick." That was the first time I felt fear. What if I did get sick? What if I needed someone? I stood in my kitchen that night and whispered to the walls. What have I done? But somewhere inside, I also whispered back, "What took you so long?" It started with the mail. A week after the call, I received a large envelope with a bright blue logo in the corner. Inside a flyer, a smiling photo of Charlotte and Matthew, and an elegant request. We're raising funds to launch the Crowley Collective, a boutique creative consultancy dedicated to shaping the future of wellness branding. There was even a line at the bottom in her handwriting, would mean so much if you could support us. Love C. No dear mom, no Ruth. Just a request. Like I was a stranger with a checkbook. I stood there in the hallway stunned. She hadn't reached out since our last call. Hadn't asked how I was, but now apparently I was useful again this time as a potential investor. My blood went cold. I flipped the page. There it was. Founding donors will be honored on our website and receive early access to our wellness retreats. Not even a private conversation, not a phone call, just a mass mailer folded next to a glossy insert on forest bathing, and ritual teas, the kind of luxury she mocked me for never affording her. I walked to the fireplace, dropped the entire thing inside, and lit a match. The flame curled fast. It was the first time I had burned anything out of rage since the night her father left. Back then, it was a photo album. This time, it was proof my daughter didn't want me. She wanted my money. Later that week, she sent a follow-up email. Hi Ruth, just checking in. Did the materials for the Crowley Collective arrive? We're on a tight fundraising timeline and wanted to make sure key supporters had a chance to get in on the ground floor. Key supporters. I wrote back one line. I'm not your family. I'm not your investor. I'm just Ruth. Remember? Her reply came 12 minutes later. Wow, that's petty. You always made it about you. I sat in the dark for hours after that, crying. No, I wish I had. What I felt wasn't sadness. It was humiliation, the creeping slow horror that I had raised someone who could cut me out like a bad stitch and still expect a check. I poured a glass of wine, turned on no lights, and sat with the truth. Charlotte didn't forget me. She had rebranded me, from mom to a potential funding stream, from family to unleveraged resource, and for a long moment I hated her, and myself, because I let it happen. But hate is a short fire. It burns hot, then leaves you standing in cold ashes. So I opened the drawer beside my chair, pulled out a folder labeled For When I'm Gone, and opened it. There at the top sat my new will, and I thought maybe I won't wait until I'm gone to send a message. Maybe some truths deserve to be heard while everyone's still alive to squirm. She messaged me the next week. Not a call. Never a call. Just a text. Hey, Matthew and I were thinking we should do dinner. Talk everything through. You free Thursday? I stared at it. The timing was surgical. She must have heard I'd been at the bank. Small-town rumors travel fast. Or maybe someone tipped her off that I'd been seen with my lawyer again. I replied, sure. Your place or mine? She said theirs. Of course. I arrived with a simple lemon tart, my own recipe, her childhood favorite. When she opened the door, she gave me that cool hostess smile she'd perfected for Instagram. Her house smelled like eucalyptus and ambition. Matthew hovered near the island, swirling a glass of Pinot. Ruth, he said warmly, like he'd invited me to a networking event. We sat. The table was already set. The food was too perfect. Sous vide salmon microgreens and something foamed. Not one warm casserole dish in sight. Charlotte kept the conversation light, surface level. Then, near dessert, she finally said, we should revisit your estate plan. It's just, well, Matthew's been reading about how vulnerable older women can be to manipulation. She said that, while looking directly at me. My fork froze mid-air. I wanted to laugh. Instead, I said, and what do you think I'm being manipulated into? Oh, I don't know, she replied, sipping water. Changing your will, rewriting your legacy on a whim. A pause. Matthew chimed in. We just want to protect what's always been the plan. We're not trying to control anything. I set my fork down. What was the plan? They both blinked. The plan. I repeated, my voice steady, where I work my entire life, raise a daughter alone, pay for everything, only to be told I'm not family but expected to bankroll yours. Charlotte looked at Matthew annoyed. This is exactly what I meant. Emotional outbursts. We just want things clean. Clean, I said softly. You mean profitable? The air shifted. Matthew's charm cracked. Ruth, no one is asking for a handout. Oh, darling, I said, reaching into my bag. You're asking for everything. I pulled out 2 envelopes, one marked truth, one marked final. I handed them each one. Charlotte frowned. What is this? It's a letter, I said. From me, the woman you used to call Mom. One explains what happened, the other just confirms what's already been filed. She didn't open hers. Matthew ripped his envelope open. His eyes scanned fast until they stopped. His face went red, then white. "What is this?" he spat. "That's your answer," I said calmly. "You wanted clarity. That document legally disinherits both of you from anything I've ever worked for." Charlotte stood so fast, her chair scraped the floor. "You can't be serious." "I am," I said, rising too. "You told me I wasn't your family anymore. I'm just agreeing with you." And then I walked out, past the marble countertops, past the scented candles named things like restraint and rebirth, and into the cool, blessed silence of my car. My hands shook the entire drive home, but when I stepped into my kitchen, I saw the tart I'd left behind on their counter untouched. That's when I cried, not because I was sad, but because I knew they hadn't invited me to reconnect. They had summoned me for a negotiation. They weren't family. They were creditors. And I had just declared bankruptcy. The plumbing burst the next morning, not a metaphor, just a cruel, wet fact. A cracked pipe beneath the sink gave way, and by the time I reached the kitchen, water was already soaking the floorboards. I stood there barefoot in my robe, staring at the chaos, thinking, of course, because grief doesn't knock anymore, it just moves in. I called the plumber, a man named Rick who smelled like old leather and kindness. He took one look and said, "This house is holding together with spit and paint, Mom." I nodded. I know. He quoted me the price. I winced, and that's when it hit me. Charlotte was right about one thing. I was alone now, fully, irrevocably. I had burned the bridge and sent the ashes by mail. There would be no one to call if I fell, no one to drive me to the hospital, no daughter checking in with worried eyes, only silence, and bills, and long days. I brewed a cup of coffee, while Rick worked, then sat at the window watching the autumn leaves die with dignity. Outside, the wind tugged them loose one by one, and I let myself ask the question that always lingers beneath bold decisions. Had I made a mistake? Should I have kept the peace? Given her the money, let her believe I was just a wallet? With a heartbeat, the doorbell rang. I startled. It wasn't Rick, it was Matthew. He stood on my porch like a lawyer delivering a verdict. He didn't smile, just handed me a letter. "What is this?" I asked. "It's a notice of intent," he said coldly. "Charlotte's seeking legal mediation regarding your will." I blinked. "You're contesting it. You're actually suing me." He gave a hollow shrug. "We believe there's undue influence involved. Possible mental decline." I nearly laughed. "You mean because I said no?" He didn't respond, just stepped off the porch, got into his car and drove away. I opened the letter. Their lawyer had the gall to suggest I was being manipulated by external parties. Who? My cat. The mailman. My hands shook. Not with fear, with fury. This wasn't about money anymore. This was about control. This was about rewriting the story of who I was, and who I had the right to be. They were trying to turn me into the villain in my own legacy. And suddenly I wasn't afraid of being alone anymore. I was afraid of becoming invisible. I spent that night hunched over old photo albums, tearing out every image of Charlotte and tucking them in a drawer, not out of spite, but to protect the version of me that still smiled in those photos. That mother deserved better. At 2:34 a.m., I made another call to my lawyer. "I want to go public," I said. "Ruth," he warned, "this could get messy." "They already made it messy," I said. "Let's make it loud, because if they wanted a battle, they were about to find out I may be old, but I built my entire life on surviving what tried to break me, and I had one more fight in me." The reporter's name was Dana, sharp, polite, and quietly furious on my behalf. She had grown up in the next town over, raised by a single mom. When I told her my story, the daughter who unmothered me, then tried to sue her way back in, she just nodded and said, "Let's make sure she never does this to someone else." We met twice, once for coffee, once in my living room where I laid out everything, the will revisions, the texts, the flyer for the wellness brand, the letter from Matthew's attorney calling me unstable. She read that last part twice and muttered, "What he means is uncompliant." That article went live on a Sunday. Headline, "From Mother to Money, When Family Tries to Inherit the Living." I didn't expect what came next. 3 women from church called crying. A woman I hadn't seen since 1975 knocked on my door with muffins and said, "You wrote what we all lived." The story went local, viral, Facebook groups full of women over 60 began sharing it like gospel. One post simply said, "Never let them write you out of your own life." Then came the voicemail. Charlotte. Not the clipped, icy Charlotte I'd come to expect, but the version I hadn't heard in years. Her voice trembling, breath short. "Ruth, Mom. I don't know what happened to us. I read the article. Everyone is sending it to me. You didn't have to. Couldn't we have just talked? She didn't say she was sorry. She said she was embarrassed. That was the difference." Then she added, voice barely a whisper, "Do you still have that lemon tart recipe? I missed the way it tasted." I didn't respond, but something in me cracked open. Later that week, she showed up. No warning, just a knock, no makeup, no camera-ready poise, just my daughter eyes raw. She didn't ask to come in. She just held out a small card. I took it. A handwritten note. Sloppy, rushed, honest. "I called you Ruth because it hurt less than calling you Mom and feeling like I'd failed you. You loved me too well. I didn't know how to hold that. I don't want your money. I want your forgiveness. But I'll earn it, not demand it." I stood still, silent, then finally said, "I don't bake lemon tart for people who sue me." She blinked, then gave a shaky laugh. "Fair." I opened the door wider. "You can stay for tea," I said. "Nothing sweet. Not yet." She came in. We sat at the kitchen table in silence, not because we didn't have words, but because for once she was letting me speak first, and I did. I told her everything, the hurt, the rage, the sense of being erased. I didn't hide my scars. She didn't flinch from them. When she left, she didn't hug me. She said, "I'll come back, if you want." I didn't answer. But when she was halfway down the walk, I called after her, "Next time, bring your own teacup," because healing has conditions now, and she'd have to meet everyone. I kept the new will exactly as it was. I didn't undo the trust for the women's shelter. I didn't re-add her name. I didn't rewrite history just because she finally chose to read it. But I did one thing quietly. I left a letter in the safety deposit box, sealed, dated and marked, for Charlotte. If she ever really comes home, inside was no apology, just the recipe for the lemon tart, and a single line at the bottom, "You don't inherit love, you maintain it." It's been 3 months. She visits now every other Sunday. Brings her own tea. Sometimes she sits in silence and just watches the garden I once planted alone. She asks questions, real ones, not the kind that seek permission, but the kind that seek truth. And when she gets it, she listens. We don't talk about the money. We don't talk about what almost broke us. We talk about bees and basil and how grief tastes like tin in silence. And one day when she asked if I needed help with the roses, I handed her the shears and said, "Careful, they still bite." She smiled, but she took them. She finally knows where she stands, not in line for an inheritance, but beside the woman who survived without her. That's enough for now. Because some children need to lose the future you planned for them, to become people you can let back in. She's not my heir anymore, but maybe, just maybe, she's learning how to be my daughter again, and that in the end is the only legacy I ever wanted. What would you have done if you were her? Leave a comment. Your story could be the one that helps someone else wake up. Subscribe, Everglimpse, for more true story thrillers like this, where the quiet ones fight back and secrets never stay buried.